This evening, Reverend John and I would like to share a reflection that we read earlier in the week. I think it was published December 20th. It's by the Reverend Michael Piazza. So we'd like to read Michael Piazza's words, and then we have a little bit to share of our own thoughts. Harriet Ritchie, a writer from Anderson, South Carolina, wrote a story about something that happened to her and her family late one night. They had been to a Christmas Eve service that ended at midnight. After worship, her husband announced that he was hungry and wanted breakfast. Of course, it was almost 1 a.m. on Christmas morning, so none of the usual places they might have gone were open. They made their way to the interstate where an all-night truck stop was still open. A few big diesels rumbled outside. Inside, a few truckers sat at the counter. A jukebox played country music. On the front window was a string of colored, blinking lights. The place smelled like bacon grease and stale coffee. A one-armed man behind the counter nodded the family toward a booth. Soon, a waitress named Rita sauntered over, handed them their menus, and asked what they'd like to drink. Harriet looked around. She felt a little bit like a snob and out of place. Her family had just come from a beautiful Christmas Eve service, and soon they would be heading to their lovely home for the night. She thought one day they would look back with a laugh and say to each other, "Remember that Christmas when we ate breakfast at that truck stop? Those awful music and those tacky lights." She was staring out the window when an old Volkswagen van drove up. A young man with a beard and baggy jeans got out, walked around, and opened the door for a young woman who was holding a baby. They hurried inside and took a booth near the back. After Rita, the waitress, took their order, the baby began to cry, and neither of the young parents could quiet him. Finally, Rita set down her coffee pot, held out her arms for the baby. "Hon, just sit there and drink your coffee. Let me see what I can do."
Soon it was evident that Rita had done this before. She began walking around the place, showing the baby first to one of the truckers and then another. One began whistling a Christmas tune and made silly faces. Quickly, the baby stopped crying and began cooing. Rita showed the baby the blinking lights on the jukebox. She brought the baby over to Harriet's table. "Just look at this little darling," she said. "Mine are so big and grown. They don't need me no more." The one-armed fellow behind the counter brought a fresh pot of coffee, and as he refilled their mugs, Harriet felt tears in her eyes. Her husband wanted to know what was wrong. "Nothing," she said, "just Christmas." Reaching in her purse for a Kleenex and a quarter, she said to her own kids, "Go see if you can find a Christmas song on the jukebox." When they were gone, Harriet quietly said, almost to herself, "He would have come here, wouldn't he?" "Who?" her husband asked. "Jesus. If Jesus were born here tonight and the choices were our neighborhood, or the church, or this truck stop, it would be right here, wouldn't it?" Her husband didn't answer right away, but looked around the place at the people there. Finally he said, "I suppose either here or a homeless shelter." "That's what bothers me," Harriet said. "When we first got here, I felt sorry for these people because they probably aren't going home to a nice neighborhood where the houses have candles in the windows and wreaths on the door. And listening to that awful music, I thought, I bet nobody here has even heard of Handel. And I think that more than any place I know, this is where Christmas is. But I'm not sure I belong. As Harriet walked with her family to the car, her husband leaned over and said, "You know, I heard something earlier at church. They said what the angels sang that first Christmas was, 'Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people.'" Maybe they meant us too.
Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be for all people. Wow, what a remarkable sentence that is. And such a powerful story, Harriet's story of an unexpected place. This story is about an encounter, encountering the other and encountering God in their midst. You know, we have Harriet, and she's in this uncomfortable situation. She feels out of place. The music isn't hers, the decorations aren't hers. This greasy spoon is occupied by people. They just don't seem to be like her at all. And it dawns on her that this is where Jesus would be. If Jesus was born now, this is where it would happen. This is where God comes into the world. In the not pretty places, in the places that we don't see on the covers of our Christmas cards. Places like a truck stop that smells of diesel fuel and cooking oil and old coffee. We encounter God in the unexpected. We encounter God in people who are different from us. At Christmas, we celebrate that God loves us so much that God comes into the world as a human being, as a person. In this way, God knows us so intimately. God experiences all of the joys and the sorrows of a human life. God is with us in the most complete way possible. God actually becomes us. But lest we begin to think of ourselves as gods, God comes into the world as a tiny, helpless little baby born to an unwed teenage mom in a poor backwater town, a religious minority with brown skin, who speaks Aramaic, not English, and lives under military occupation. You know, in many ways, Jesus isn't like most of us at all. But you know, this is an awesome gift because now we meet God in others, especially in people who aren't like us, people we don't know, people we don't understand all the time. It is uncomfortable to wonder, like Harriet did, if Jesus was born tonight, would we know it? Or would it be in a person or a place that we've avoided? You know, perhaps you wouldn't be as uncomfortable as Harriet was in that truck stop. If so, maybe try to picture another place where you might feel like the outcast. Because that's where God is. God is in the encounter. When we go out of our comfort zone, when we realize that the other is not to be feared or condemned, but listened to, respected, and honored for the holiness that's inside of them, it's a part of them. That's when we encounter Jesus. Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. It's for all people, all people. That's a really amazing gift.
We come to church hoping we're going to encounter God. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. We have to pay attention for that to happen. And sometimes we need to know what to look for and what to listen for. Sometimes our expectations block the way that God is trying to touch our hearts on any given morning or evening. Perhaps you were reminded, as I was, listening to the story about how, when we baptize a child, after the baptism's done, we go down the center aisle and introduce she or he to all the people who've gathered here. And as I was reading and listening to what Rita did with the baby, I was reminded of how similar that is to what we do. We encounter God in unexpected places and at unexpected times. I think what's really important for us is to try not to limit where that's going to happen. Try not to pigeonhole it and say, well, if I want to meet God, if I want to encounter Jesus, I know I go to church and that's where it's going to happen. And hopefully it does, in the music and the people that we meet and the time of prayer. But it's not the only place. It's not the only place that we meet God. And we know that. We know that as individuals. We know that as a congregation. I am so grateful to be a part of a group of people who is willing to go to New Hope and volunteer, who serves dinner at Broad Street, who goes to gather the Spirit and serves breakfast and shares fresh vegetables, who walks in the breast cancer walk, who pray for people that you know and people that you don't. It's in moments like that in which we are in different places, in which we're doing things that we don't usually do, that if we open ourselves up, we have a chance to encounter God. We have a chance to absorb the Spirit of what God is doing and trying to say to the people in that place, but also us in that very place. We have beautiful nativities in the narthex. We have one up front that we've been sharing with the kids throughout Advent. We have nativities from different places around the world. We have these nativities to remind us of Jesus' birth, but we also have these nativities to remind us that Jesus was not born in a palace, was not born in a swanky neighborhood. And while there's nothing wrong with those places, when we think that that's the best that we can attain to and the only places we should be looking for anything good to happen, we've limited where and how we're going to encounter God. Because Jesus is born in a stable, there's just no prettying that up. He gets placed in a feeding trough where animals had been eating just a little time before. Shepherds, perhaps the lowest wage workers of their day, come and are the first witnesses to this birth. Jesus came into the world in poverty, and you know what? Throughout his life, he doesn't wander far from that. If we truly want to experience where and how God is working in the world, we cannot limit where we go and who we listen to. So on this evening in which we celebrate this grand and wondrous birth, let's remember how God came into the world. And the reality that God trusted all of us to take care of a little child with no limits as to who or where that was going to happen. Because that's what keeps happening. Because God does not want to be separated from us. And God keeps coming back. Amen.